I need you to understand something before I begin. If I had packed up my gear and driven home when the air first went quiet, when the insects stopped and the wind seemed to pull back like a held breath, none of this would have happened. I would still sleep through the night. I would still trust the dark. Instead, I stayed. I stayed because I wanted to prove something to myself, to the empty trees, maybe even to you. And by morning the Dogman was watching me from the tree line, and I knew the forest had been watching long before that. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I ignored the warning signs, and if you ever feel what I felt out there, you need to leave before it's too late. I should have left when the silence felt heavy. I should have left when I found the footprints, but I didn't. I drove out there just before dusk, tires crunching over old gravel that hadn't been disturbed in months. The forest sat low and thick against the horizon, pine and birch tangled together, branches skeletal against a sky bruised purple by the sinking sun. I remember joking to myself while I killed the engine, something dry and stupid about horror movies and white guys making bad decisions. I even laughed. It sounded thin in the open air. The joke didn't last long. The cold did. It crept in through my sleeves as I unloaded my pack, a damp autumn chill that smelled like wet leaves and distant rot. The ground was soft under my boots, the kind that holds impressions longer than it should. I chose a small clearing near a shallow ravine, not too exposed, not too enclosed, balanced, safe, I told myself. The first hour was almost peaceful. I set up my tent, gathered kindling, struck a match. The fire caught slow, resin popping in the wood like quiet applause. Smoke curled upward and flattened under the dark canopy. I remember noticing how quickly the forest swallowed sound. Even my breathing felt intrusive. Still I felt calm, proud even. Alone in the woods, no signal, no noise. Just me and the steady pulse of the fire. That's when I heard the first knock, not loud, not close, just wood on wood, somewhere beyond the ravine. I froze, head tilted. It came again, a hollow, deliberate crack. I told myself it was a branch falling. Trees shift at night. Things settle. But the rhythm was wrong, too spaced, too intentional. I stood, heart picking up, and listened until my ears strained. Nothing. The fire hissed softly. Somewhere to my left, a twig snapped under weight. That wasn't mine. "Hello?" I called out before I could stop myself. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. There was no reply. Of course there wasn't. I remember feeling embarrassed, like the forest had caught me flinching. I sat back down. I added more wood to the fire. I tried to slow my breathing. That was the first mistake, convincing myself I was overreacting. The second came an hour later when I walked the perimeter of the clearing with my flashlight. I didn't need to. I told myself it was just caution. The beam cut through mist that had begun to gather low to the ground, pale and shifting like something alive. I scanned the tree line, trunks, roots, fallen logs. Then I saw the prints near the edge of the ravine. At first I thought they were wolf tracks, large, deep impressions pressed into the mud. But as I crouched closer, the light shaking slightly in my hand, I realized they weren't right. The heel was too defined, the arch too narrow, the toes too long. It looked like a canine had learned to walk like a man. I remember touching one, pressing my fingers into the cool earth. The print dwarfed my hand. The soil inside it was still moist, not yet dried by the night air. Fresh. That's when the temperature seemed to drop all at once, like a door had opened somewhere unseen. I stood slowly and scanned the darkness again. The forest felt different now. Not empty, occupied. I told myself it was adrenaline, that fear distorts logic. There are bears, there are wolves, there are explanations, but none of them explained the second set of prints that began several feet away, as if whatever made them had stepped from nothing into the mud and then back into nothing again. I didn't sleep much. I lay inside the tent, every small sound magnified. The nylon walls breathed with the wind. My own heartbeat thudded in my ears. Around midnight, the knocks returned. Closer this time, 3 in a row. Then silence. I whispered to myself that animals don't knock on trees to communicate with campers. But something did. Something was circling. I could hear it now, faint footfalls pacing just beyond the glow of my dying fire. Heavy, measured, not the skittish scurry of deer, not the random rustle of raccoons. This was deliberate. It stopped directly behind my tent. I held my breath until my lungs burned. A low exhale drifted through the fabric. Not a growl, not yet, just breath. Hot enough that I could feel the faint warmth through the thin material near my head. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Minutes passed like that. Then the weight shifted away, slow steps retreating. I told myself I would pack up at first light. I meant it. But dawn didn't come with relief. It came with proof. The fire had burned down to gray ash. The mist clung thicker than before, coiling low around the clearing. I unzipped the tent cautiously, the sound too loud in the stillness, and there they were. Prints all around my camp, not just at the ravine. They circled my tent in a wide ring, overlapping in places, gouged deep into the soil as if the thing had paced for hours, watching, waiting. My stomach turned cold. I stepped out slowly, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it. At first it was just height, a shape too tall to be a wolf, too broad to be a man, standing between 2 pines about 40 yards out. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The light was thin and gray, but I could make out the outline of a head that sloped forward into a muzzle, ears pointed high, shoulders massive and wrong. It stood upright, completely still. I felt my mind trying to fracture the image into something reasonable, a trick of light, a burned tree trunk, a hunter in gear. But then it shifted its weight, and the movement was fluid, balanced, unmistakably alive. Its eyes caught what little dawn there was and held it, yellow, focused, on me. I don't remember deciding to speak, but I heard myself whisper, "I'm leaving." The words tasted like surrender. It tilted its head slightly, almost curious, not aggressive, not yet, just observing. The air between us felt charged, like before a storm. I took one step backward toward my truck. It took one step forward out of the trees. The sound of its foot pressing into the earth was heavy and wet. The proportions were wrong up close, long arms ending in dark claws, chest broad and fur matted, legs bent slightly as if coiled with potential energy. It didn't rush me. It didn't need to. It knew the distance, favored it. I realized then that the knocks, the pacing, the breath against my tent, they weren't random. They were tests. It had been measuring me, seeing if I would run, seeing how I reacted. My keys slipped from my fingers when I tried to grip them. They hit the ground with a metallic clink that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. The creature's ears twitched at the sound. A low rumble began in its chest, deep enough that I felt it vibrate through my ribs. Not a roar, a warning. I bent slowly, never breaking eye contact, and picked up the keys. My hands shook so badly I could barely aim the fob. The truck beeped when it unlocked. The sound seemed to irritate it. Its lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth too long and too numerous for any natural wolf. Saliva hung in thin strands between them. I expected it to charge then. Instead, it did something worse. It smiled, not with humor, with recognition, as if it understood exactly what I was thinking, that if I made it to the driver's seat, I might survive. It let me move, step by step. I reached the door, opened it, slid inside. The moment the engine turned over, it lunged forward 2 paces, stopping just short of the clearing's edge. Close enough that I saw the muscle ripple under its fur. Close enough that I smelled it. A rank, metallic scent, like blood left too long in the sun. I slammed the door and threw the truck into reverse. Gravel sprayed. The tires fishtailed before catching. As I backed down the narrow path, I kept my eyes on it in the mirror. It didn't chase. It stood there, watching, head slightly cocked, as if committing my shape to memory. Only when the trees swallowed it from view did I realize I had been screaming the entire time. I didn't stop driving until the forest gave way to open highway. Even then, the feeling didn't leave. I keep thinking about the way it paced my camp instead of attacking, the way it tested the boundaries, the way it waited for morning, for me to see it clearly. That wasn't instinct. That was intention. People ask why I'm sure it was a dogman, why I don't call it a bear standing upright or some misidentified animal. Bears don't knock in patterns. Wolves don't circle tents for hours without striking. And nothing natural smiles like that. I've gone over every detail in my head 1,000 times, trying to find the point where I could have changed the outcome. The truth is, it wasn't about that night alone. It was about territory. I walked into something's domain and announced myself with fire and light and arrogance. And it answered. Sometimes, when I wake up just before dawn, I swear I hear 3 slow knocks somewhere outside my house. I tell myself it's pipes expanding, wood settling, normal sounds. But I don't camp anymore. I don't test silence. Because I learned something out there in that clearing. Some things in the forest don't just hunt flesh. They study it. They learn it. And once they've watched you long enough, once they've measured the way you breathe in the dark, you don't ever really stop being observed. I left the forest that morning, but I've never been certain the forest let me go. I didn't tell anyone for 3 days. That part matters. Because silence has a way of feeding things, and I fed it. I went to work. I answered emails. I laughed at a joke in the break room and felt my own voice echo inside my skull, like it didn't belong to me. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, something had shifted permanently, like a bone set wrong and healed crooked. I kept seeing it standing there between the pines, not charging, not fleeing, watching, measuring. I replayed that moment in the mirror when I shaved. I replayed it in the hum of the shower. I replayed it every time I closed my eyes. And the detail that kept clawing its way back wasn't the height or the teeth or even the eyes. It was the patience. Predators don't waste energy. They don't circle for hours unless they're deciding something. I started noticing small things around my house. Probably nothing. That's what I told myself. The first was the smell, faint, metallic, like pennies pressed against my tongue. It drifted through my living room late at night, subtle and gone before I could pinpoint it. I checked the trash, the sink, under the cabinets, nothing. The second was the sound, 3 slow knocks, not on the door, not quite on the wall either, more like inside the walls, hollow, measured. The first time it happened, I froze on my couch. The TV flickering blue light across the room. Knock, knock, knock. Even spacing. Then silence. I waited for the pipes to groan, or the heater to kick on. Some normal explanation to follow. Nothing did. I laughed under my breath, the same thin laugh from the forest, and told myself, old houses settle. Wood contracts. My house isn't even that old, but fear doesn't care about logic. It cares about pattern. And the pattern was the same. 3 knocks, pause, watching. I started sleeping with the lights on, not because I believed it could be outside my home. I'm not insane. I know distance. I drove nearly 2 hours from that forest. But something had attached itself to the memory, and memory doesn't obey geography. The 3rd night I dreamed of the clearing, only it wasn't empty this time. My tent was there, unzipped, sagging inward like lungs collapsed. The fire pit was cold, and the prints, those elongated wrong impressions, led not in circles, but straight toward me. In the dream, I wasn't in the truck. I wasn't moving. I was standing exactly where I'd stood at dawn, and it was closer this time, close enough that I could see the texture of its fur, thick and matted along the shoulders, thinning near the wrists, close enough to see scars across its muzzle, pale against dark hair. It leaned down slightly, bringing its face level with mine. I could smell it again, iron and damp soil. Its eyes weren't yellow in the dream. They were human brown. That detail woke me. I sat up, gasping, sheets twisted around my legs like restraints. The room was still. The digital clock glowed 3:17 a.m. And from somewhere in the house came the faintest shift of weight on wood. Not a knock. A step. I held my breath the way I had in the tent. The air felt thick, harder to draw into my lungs. Another step. Closer to my bedroom door. I reached for my phone without looking away from the dark hallway beyond the doorframe. My hand trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. I considered calling the police. And what would I say? That something from the forest had followed me home. That it knocked in 3s. I stayed silent instead, listening. The handle on my bedroom door did not turn. The door did not open. But the wood creaked as if something leaned its weight against it from the other side. Slow. Testing. The same way it had tested the perimeter of my camp. The same way it had waited for morning. Minutes stretched. I don't know how long. Eventually the pressure eased. The house returned to its ordinary hum, refrigerator cycling, distant car passing on the street. I did not sleep again that night. The next morning I searched the yard. I don't know what I expected to find. Claw marks on the siding, prints in the grass. The lawn was damp with dew but undisturbed. The fence intact. My rational mind latched on to that, see? Nothing. Just stress. Trauma response. I almost believed it. Until I walked around to the side of the house near my bedroom window. The soil there is softer because the gutter leaks when it rains. And pressed into that mud were 3 impressions. Not a full circle, not pacing. Just 3 distinct prints, each one deeper than the last, as if whatever made them had stepped closer to the wall before stopping. They were partially smeared, like something had tried to wipe them away, or like they had faded unnaturally fast. I crouched and placed my hand beside one. Same proportions, same wrong arch. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might vomit. I backed away slowly, scanning the street. Morning traffic moved normally. A woman jogged past, with earbuds in, unaware. The world hadn't changed, only my understanding of it had. That's when I realized the forest hadn't been the event. It had been the introduction. I went back inside and locked every door, as if locks matter to something that can stand upright at 8 feet and press its breath through tent fabric without tearing it. I considered going back to the forest that afternoon. That thought scares me more than the prints. Part of me wanted confirmation, closure, proof that this was a territorial encounter and nothing more. That if I returned and found nothing, I could reclaim my sanity. I even packed my camera, Then I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My eyes looked hollow, sleep-deprived, fractured, and beneath the fear there was something else, recognition. Like some primitive part of me understood a rule I had broken. You don't return to a predator's ground after it has marked you, marked. That word lodged itself in my throat. I hadn't been attacked. I hadn't been chased. I had been studied and then released. That implies choice. That implies I wasn't worth killing yet. I didn't go back that day. Instead, I started researching, late into the night, scrolling through forums and archived sightings, grainy photos and whispered accounts, dogmen, upright canine, wood knocks, territorial behavior, circling camps, watching from tree lines at dawn, the patterns repeated, the knocks especially. Some said it was a warning, some said it was communication, a few said it was a way of testing fear response. That detail made my skin crawl. Because I remembered how I had called out into the dark that first night, how my voice had trembled. I had shown it exactly what I was, afraid. The posts ended the same way most of the time, no proof, no bodies, just people who stopped camping alone, people who heard knocks near their homes after encounters, people who felt watched long after leaving the woods. I shut my laptop when the metallic smell drifted through the room again, stronger this time, closer. It wasn't coming from the kitchen. It was coming from the hallway, from the direction of my bedroom. I stood slowly, every muscle tight, and stepped toward it. The air grew heavier with each step, like humidity before a storm. And then from the other side of the closed bedroom door came 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not hollow this time, solid, wood to wood. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I just stood there, inches away, listening to whatever was on the other side breathe. I stood there for a long time, with my hand hovering inches from the doorknob, staring at the faint scuff mark near the bottom panel like it might rearrange itself into something reasonable. The metallic smell thickened, coating the back of my throat. My ears strained past the pounding of my own pulse. On the other side of the door, something shifted its weight. Not a scrape, not claws, just the subtle compression of wood under mass. I told myself if it were real, if anything physical were actually leaning there, the door would bow, the hinges would complain. They didn't. They held steady, which somehow made it worse. Because whatever stood there didn't need to force entry. It was letting me know it could. I whispered, "Go away." The words sounded childish, small, the same smallness from the forest when I called into the dark. Silence answered. Then softer this time, a slow exhale seeped under the crack at the bottom of the door. Warm? I felt it brush across my bare feet, like air from a vent. My stomach folded in on itself. My rational brain screamed that drafts exist, that HVAC systems cycle unpredictably at night. But drafts don't carry scent. Drafts don't breathe. I stepped back. The pressure against the door eased almost immediately, as if it had been waiting for that reaction. The house returned to stillness. The smell thinned, diluted into the normal odor of dust and fabric softener and stale air. I stayed there another full minute, counting each second under my breath. Nothing moved again. I didn't open the door until morning. When I did, sunlight spilled across the carpet in a harmless gold stripe. My bedroom looked untouched, bed unmade, closet closed, window locked. I checked it twice. Then a third time. I knelt and examined the hardwood floor near the door, expecting to see scratches or dents where weight had pressed from the other side. There were none. But the scuff mark I'd been staring at the night before, small, crescent-shaped, was deeper now, as if something hard had nudged it repeatedly. testing. I traced it with my fingertip. The wood felt warm. That's when I started losing sleep in a way that felt permanent. The next week, blurred. I installed cameras around the house, front door, back door, driveway, hallway. I told myself it was for peace of mind, something tangible. Data doesn't lie. I adjusted sensitivity settings, triple-checked storage capacity, made sure the timestamps were synced correctly. If anything approached my home, I would know. I would have proof. The first 2 nights were quiet. No knocks, no smell. I almost felt foolish for the paranoia. On the 3rd night, the alert pinged at 2:46 a.m. Motion detected. Backyard. My eyes snapped open before I fully registered why. The room was dark except for the dim red glow of the charging cable near my nightstand. I reached for my phone slowly, afraid of the screen lighting up too brightly, as if whatever was outside could sense it. The camera feed loaded in grainy black and white. At first I saw nothing, just the fence line, the patch of lawn, the side of the house. Then the image shifted slightly as the infrared adjusted, and something tall stood at the edge of the frame near the tree in the back corner. It wasn't moving. It was just there. The height alone made my mouth go dry. The top of its head nearly aligned with the lower branches of the oak tree. Its shoulders were too wide for any man. Its arms hung low, almost to its knees. The posture wasn't hunched like a bear. It was upright, balanced, intent. The camera's timestamp ticked forward. 2:47 a.m. It didn't blink, didn't sway, didn't twitch. It was facing the house, facing my bedroom window. I forgot to breathe. The infrared caught its eyes briefly, as it tilted its head a few degrees. They reflected pale at first, then for one frame, just one, they shifted darker, almost absorbing the light instead of reflecting it, as if it understood the camera. My thumb hovered over the record function, even though the system was already saving footage automatically. I felt ridiculous and helpless at the same time. "Please don't," I whispered, not sure what I was asking it not to do. The creature stepped forward once. The grass flattened beneath its weight. The movement was slow, deliberate, controlled. It wasn't stalking, it was approaching. And then the feed glitched. Static streaked across the screen in horizontal lines. The image distorted, flickered, froze. When it returned 3 seconds later, the backyard was empty. I shot upright in bed, heart hammering so violently I thought I might black out. I ran to the window but stopped short of pulling back the curtain. Some instinct warned me not to reveal my position. Instead, I checked the other cameras. Front yard, empty. Driveway, empty. Hallway inside the house, nothing. Backyard again, still empty. I replayed the footage. The glitch wasn't subtle. It wasn't a simple connection hiccup. The entire image warped at the exact moment it stepped closer. And the final frame before the distortion, its head had turned slightly upward, toward the camera itself. The next morning I went outside with shaking hands and examined the lawn. The grass where it had stood was crushed into the soil, darker than the surrounding blades. Not torn, not uprooted, just compressed. 3 impressions led away from that spot toward the fence. 3, even spacing. The fence showed no damage, no broken slats, no sign of climbing. Beyond it lay the narrow stretch of wooded land separating my neighborhood from the main road. Not a forest, not like before. Just enough trees to hide something tall if it chose to stand still. I realized then that it wasn't confined to wilderness. It didn't belong to one territory. It adapted. And I had shown it where I lived. That thought changed everything. I stopped leaving the house after dark unless absolutely necessary. Groceries were daytime. Gas was daytime. I found myself scanning tree lines in parking lots, reflective glass in storefronts, shadows between cars. I began to notice how many places offer concealment if something is patient enough. The knocks returned 2 nights later, this time not on the bedroom door. On the exterior wall behind my couch, 3 deliberate strikes. The sound vibrated through the drywall and into my spine. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I sat there in the glow of a single lamp, hands clenched so tight my knuckles burned. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. I imagined it standing just outside the siding, one clawed finger tapping experimentally against the structure, testing thickness, testing reaction. My phone buzzed with another camera alert. Motion detected, front porch. I didn't want to look. I looked anyway. The front camera showed nothing for a moment. Then a shadow slid across the porch light's glow, not cast by anything visible, just a distortion in brightness, as if something tall passed between the light and the lens. The feed flickered, and then 3 dark shapes appeared at the bottom of the frame. Not the creature, its feet. Close to the door, the toes were elongated, claws curving slightly inward. The stance was stable, grounded. It stood directly in front of my entrance, waiting. The door handle didn't turn. It didn't try to break in. Instead, from both sides of the house at once, the front porch and the exterior wall behind me, came 3 synchronized knocks. The sound split my focus in half. It had circled again, just like the clearing. My throat tightened. "What do you want?" I said aloud, voice cracking. The knocking stopped immediately. In the silence that followed, I felt something settle into place inside my mind, a realization that tasted like iron. It didn't want to get in. It wanted me to come out. The same way it had stepped forward in the clearing when I stepped back, the same way it lunged only after the engine turned over. It was calibrating, drawing lines, and I was still reacting exactly the way it expected. I stood slowly and walked toward the front door. Every instinct screamed against it, but something else pushed me forward. Anger, maybe, or exhaustion. I was tired of being studied like an experiment. I stopped inches from the door. The camera feed still showed those feet on the porch, unmoving. I placed my hand flat against the wood. On the other side, a faint warmth pressed back, not forcefully, just enough to let me know it was aware of the contact. We stood like that for several seconds, 2 shapes separated by a thin barrier. Then very slowly, the pressure receded. The feet disappeared from the frame. The backyard camera pinged again. Motion detected. I switched feeds. It stood near the oak tree once more, half hidden in shadow, body angled slightly away, as if already preparing to leave. But its head was turned toward the house, toward me. Even through the grainy black and white, I felt the weight of its gaze. And then it did something new. It lifted one arm and pointed, not at the house, beyond it, toward the road. A simple gesture, clear, intentional. Then it lowered its arm and stepped backward into darkness. The feed did not glitch this time. It just watched me for one more second before vanishing behind the tree. I didn't understand the gesture at first, until the next morning, when I found a single deep print in the soil beside my car. Not 3. 1. Positioned directly next to the driver's side door. Waiting. I didn't drive to work that morning. I stood in the driveway, staring at that single print beside my driver's side door, keys clenched so tight in my hand that the metal edges cut into my palm. The impression was deep, deeper than the others had been. The soil there was compacted gravel mixed with dirt, not soft lawn, yet whatever made that mark had pressed into it as if it were wet clay. One print, not pacing, not circling, waiting. I crouched slowly, my knees popping in the quiet. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. I placed my hand next to the impression. The proportions were the same as before. Elongated toes, narrow arch, defined heel. But this time there was something else. The toes were angled slightly toward the car door. Not toward the house, toward the seat where I sit. I felt exposed standing there in the open driveway, like a specimen under glass. The neighborhood looked ordinary. A dog barked 2 houses down. A garbage truck groaned somewhere around the corner. Morning sun stretched thin across rooftops. Normal? I kept repeating that word in my head. Normal? But nothing about the print felt normal. It wasn't random. It wasn't exploratory. It was placed with intention. It stood where a person would stand before opening a car door, a mirror of me. The gesture from the night before replayed in my mind, its arm lifting, pointing toward the road. And now this. It wanted me to drive, or it was telling me it could follow. I straightened slowly, scanning the thin line of trees beyond the fence. The oak branches swayed gently in a breeze I barely felt. Shadows layered between trunks, overlapping in ways that made depth hard to judge. "You're imagining escalation," I told myself. Trauma distorts pattern recognition. The human brain seeks meaning in coincidence. But this didn't feel like coincidence. I backed away from the car. I called in sick to work. The rest of the day stretched long and hollow. I reviewed the footage again, frame by frame, zooming in until pixels broke apart into static blocks. Every time the creature appeared, its posture remained controlled, balanced, curious, never frantic, never enraged. There was intelligence there, not animal instinct alone. And that was worse. By late afternoon, the metallic smell crept back into the house, faint but unmistakable. It lingered near the windows, near the doors, as if something paced the perimeter just out of sight. I didn't hear knocks that night. Instead, I heard movement on the roof, soft at first, a shifting weight above the ceiling. My body locked the instant the sound began. I was sitting on the couch, lights off, only the television casting pale blue flickers across the walls. The first step above me was subtle enough that I almost dismissed it. Then came another, and another, slow, evenly spaced, crossing from one end of the house to the other. I tilted my head upward, tracking it through drywall and insulation. The creak of beams under strain told me this wasn't small. It wasn't raccoons. It wasn't wind. The weight moved directly above the hallway leading to my bedroom. Stopped. 3 slow knocks vibrated through the ceiling. Dust drifted down, in faint, glittering particles. My mouth went dry. "You're not real," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. The roof groaned slightly as the weight shifted again. Then silence, complete. No descent, no scrambling, no retreat. I grabbed my phone and checked the cameras. Front yard, empty. Backyard, empty. Driveway, empty. There was nothing climbing down, nothing leaping from the roof, which meant either it had vanished or it was still up there. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I stepped outside and craned my neck to examine the shingles. No visible damage, no broken gutters, no claw marks. But near the back corner of the roof, one shingle was slightly depressed, like something heavy had rested there long enough to leave an imprint. I stood in the yard, staring at it, arms wrapped around myself against a cold that wasn't entirely physical. It was expanding its territory. First the forest, then my yard, then my walls, now my roof. Each boundary tested, crossed, claimed. That realization settled into me like lead. I considered leaving town. The thought came suddenly, sharp and desperate. Pack what I can, drive somewhere crowded, somewhere loud, somewhere without trees, but the image of that single print beside my car stopped me. If it could stand there without triggering cameras, if it could glitch footage at will, what made me think distance would matter? The next night, it changed tactics. No knocks, no movement, just absence. The silence felt heavier than any sound. I sat in the living room with all the lights off, refusing to give it the reaction it seemed to want. Hours passed. Midnight slipped into early morning. Nothing. For a moment, just a moment, I wondered if it had grown bored. The thought almost made me laugh. And then my phone buzzed, not a camera alert. A notification from my car's security system. Driver door opened. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't left the house. I hadn't touched the keys. The notification repeated. Driver door open. I moved to the window slowly, heart hammering so violently it blurred my vision. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see the driveway. The driver's side door hung wide open. Interior light glowing faintly. I couldn't see inside from that angle. The metallic smell flooded the room, thick, fresh, like blood. My knees nearly buckled. The car alarm didn't sound. The system wasn't triggered beyond the door sensor, which meant it hadn't been forced. It had been opened. I don't remember unlocking it. I don't remember giving it access. I stepped away from the window, breath shallow and rapid. No, I whispered. No. My mind raced through explanations. Electrical malfunction, faulty sensor, sleepwalking, but I knew I hadn't left the couch, and the keys were still on the coffee table in front of me. Another notification buzzed. Driver door closed. I froze. The interior light in the driveway clicked off. The door shut softly, not slammed, just closed. I didn't look again. I couldn't. Instead, I stood there, trembling, listening for footsteps on gravel, listening for knocks. Nothing came. After several minutes, I forced myself to check the driveway camera. The feed showed the car clearly. Door closed, vehicle undisturbed. I rewound the footage. At 2:12 a.m., the driver's side door slowly swung open. No figure visible, no hand. Just the door moving outward, as if guided by something standing exactly where the camera couldn't capture. The angle left a narrow blind spot directly beside the vehicle. The door remained open for 23 seconds. Then it closed. Again, with no visible cause. My throat tightened painfully. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was demonstrating access, demonstrating proximity, demonstrating control. I didn't step outside until full daylight. When I did, I approached the car cautiously, half expecting something to be waiting inside. The driver's seat was empty, but it wasn't untouched. The seat had been adjusted, pushed farther back, farther than I ever set it, and on the steering wheel. 3 long, shallow indentations pressed into the leather, claw marks. My vision tunneled. It had sat there, in my seat, hands, if you could call them that, resting on my wheel. I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat. The gesture from the night before returned to me. It had pointed toward the road. It wanted me to drive. But now it had shown me it could drive, too. Or at least sit where I do. The boundaries weren't just being crossed. They were being mirrored. That night I locked myself in the bedroom and pushed a dresser against the door. I didn't care how irrational it looked. Around 3 a.m. the knocks came again. Not on the walls, not on the roof, on the dresser. 3 dull thuds, vibrating through the wood pressed against the door. Close, intimate. Right on the barrier I had created. The message was clear. Barriers are suggestions. I pressed my back against the opposite wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. "What do you want from me?" I whispered into the dark. For the first time, It answered, not in words, in sound. A low rumble from the other side of the door, deep and resonant, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. Not anger, not hunger, recognition. As if it were reminding me of the clearing, of dawn, of the moment our eyes met. The rumble faded slowly, then softer than before. A single knock, not three, one. Directly at the height of the doorknob, an invitation, and I realized with a sick, sinking certainty that this had never been about territory alone. It wasn't chasing me away. It was drawing me back, and every line it crossed was shaping something inevitable. Because predators don't just study prey to kill them. Sometimes they study them to change them. And as I sat there in the dark, listening to its slow breathing through the wood, I felt something inside my chest shift in a way I didn't fully understand. Not just fear, something else. Something answering back. I didn't sleep at all that night. Not really. I sat on the floor against the far wall of my bedroom, listening to the house breathe and imagining the shape on the other side of the dresser. My own heartbeat sounded too loud in my ears. My body shook from exhaustion and fear, and my mind looped over the day's events repeatedly. It was patient, I realized, calculating. It didn't rush. It didn't attack. And that patience made me aware of my own fragility in ways nothing else had. By the time the first weak light of dawn pushed through my curtains, I had barely moved, barely eaten, barely thought of anything but that rhythm of knocks and the impression of those elongated feet beside my car. The morning air was stale and heavy. I didn't check outside. I didn't dare. When I finally allowed myself to stand, my legs trembled under the weight of exhaustion. Every step toward the window was measured. I moved like a prisoner testing a loose lock. I slid the curtain back slightly. The yard was empty. The oak tree stood in its usual place, branches swaying lazily in the light breeze, leaves glinting in a pale sun. Everything looked ordinary. Nothing seemed disturbed. The relief was shallow and temporary, like holding your breath underwater and finally surfacing only to realize the water is still there, waiting to pull you back under. I spent that entire morning pacing the house. The rational part of me repeated every logical explanation over and over. It could be a human intruder, maybe a prankster, maybe an animal with unnatural intelligence. Sleep deprivation was distorting my perception. Yet even as I told myself that, I noticed the way the air carried a metallic tang in subtle waves. It wasn't constant, but it appeared and disappeared unpredictably, like it was testing my awareness. My stomach knotted at the thought. The memory of its eyes in the clearing, glowing yellow in the dim dawn, flashed through my mind, and I felt something inside me twist with a mixture of fear and fascination. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything else. Work was impossible. I couldn't concentrate on the simplest tasks. My computer screen became a blur of colors and text. I realized, almost with shame, that my attention was drawn to shadows everywhere. The line of the oak in the neighbor's yard, the slight dip in my driveway, the way the wind moved through tree branches and cast patterns across the floor. Every subtle shift in the light felt like eyes following me, testing me, waiting for a reaction. I knew that wasn't normal. I knew that my mind was beginning to fracture under this relentless surveillance. And yet, I couldn't stop looking. That evening I resolved I had to see it. I had to confirm its presence. Logic or no, proof or no. I had to know that what I had felt and seen and smelled wasn't the product of fear and sleepless nights. I packed a small flashlight, my phone, and a bottle of water, and I moved to the backyard. I didn't step onto the grass at first. I stayed on the concrete patio, sweeping the area with my flashlight in tight arcs. Shadows bent strangely. The air was heavy and cold despite a mild evening. My breath left white trails. I stayed like that for nearly an hour, waiting, hoping. My fingers shook on the flashlight. My ears were straining to catch every sound. Then very faintly, I heard it. A low, rhythmic rustle from the tree line near the corner of the fence. Not leaves moving in wind, not rodents scurrying. Something deliberate, heavy, measuring. My chest constricted as I slowly aimed the flashlight in that direction. I saw nothing at first. The shadows between the trees were thick. Then a movement, a shape. Tall, broad, hunched slightly but upright. Its fur glimmered faintly under the beam. I froze. The shape froze. Mutual recognition passed silently between us. I could almost feel its awareness pressing outward like a physical force. It shifted slightly, leaning forward, and the ground beneath it bore a faint impression. Another single, elongated footprint. I swallowed hard. The air was thick with the metallic scent I had learned to recognize. Something deep inside me surged, a mixture of awe, terror, and morbid fascination. I realized this wasn't just an animal, not just a predator. This was something intelligent, calculating, observing, and it wasn't hunting me, at least not yet. I spoke without thinking. "Why are you here?" My voice cracked on the words. Silence answered. Then softly, a series of knocks. 3. Slow. Deliberate. The same rhythm I had first heard in the forest. Only this time, it came not from wood, but from the ground itself. The soil shifted faintly with each impact, like a heartbeat communicating directly to me. I staggered backward. My mind raced. It had learned the house, learned the yard, learned how I responded. Every movement I had made over the last week had been catalogued, analyzed. I stumbled inside, slamming the back door and locking it. The sound of the locks clicked loudly, yet I felt no relief. It wasn't the presence outside that terrified me. It was what it had learned, what it had mirrored, what it understood about me. Every time I moved, every hesitation, every glance, every breath, it catalogued, and I knew, deep in a place beneath rational thought, that there was nothing I could do that it hadn't already predicted. Night came slowly. I barricaded myself in the bedroom again. The dresser against the door felt absurd. It was humanly strong enough to hold a person, but what was on the other side wasn't human. My phone was recording continuously, all cameras active, notifications set to maximum sensitivity. I couldn't trust my ears. The metallic smell returned, thick and pervasive. I gagged slightly, but didn't dare leave the room. The knocks came. Not the usual 3. This time, 5. Slow, deliberate, synchronized with faint thuds that seemed to vibrate through the walls and floor. I counted them aloud to steady my racing mind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then silence. I waited another 20 minutes. Nothing. No rustling. No movement. Just my own panicked breath. Then came a whisper, not audible in the normal sense, but it carried in a way that vibrated through the floorboards. A single word, almost human in cadence. "Come!" My stomach dropped. My hands trembled violently. I told myself I was imagining it. Trauma-induced auditory hallucination, stress, sleep deprivation. I had rational explanations for everything, but none fit. My gut screamed that it was real. I stayed put. I didn't move. Hours passed. The sound of the house settling, the distant car engines, everything else, all drowned beneath a low, constant awareness that something was just outside, watching, waiting. At 3:17 a.m., a sound I had come to recognize filled the room. 3 soft knocks, measured, deliberate, coming from the dresser I had shoved against the door. The vibration traveled through the wall, up into my chest, and resonated in my skull. I wanted to scream. My body wanted to run. But I didn't. I froze. Then, as if acknowledging my compliance, the pressure stopped. Silence returned. The metallic smell dissipated slowly, leaving only the faintest trace in the air. Morning came. I didn't sleep. I checked outside. The lawn was undisturbed except for a single footprint pressed into the soil near the oak tree. Not multiple prints, just one, facing toward the road, waiting. I realized then the truth. Whatever this was, it had marked me. Not just in the forest, not just outside my house. Deeply, permanently. Every step, every sound, every breath I had taken since first encountering it had been catalogued. I was aware of it. It was aware of me. And somehow, this awareness connected us. I began noticing small signs everywhere. A shadow where there should be none. A faint metallic scent in the air. Rustling in trees, even in the windless stillness. The universe itself seemed to whisper that it was always near. Watching. Waiting for a pattern to emerge that it could test. I stopped going outside after dark. I stopped leaving my house unless necessary. I slept with lights on. Every sound made me jump. Every creak of the floorboards made my stomach lurch. I became a prisoner of vigilance. Yet, I also felt a morbid fascination growing within me. I wanted to see it again. I wanted confirmation, proof, understanding. Even though deep in my chest I knew it would never be safe. Weeks passed. The knocks became less frequent. The metallic smell less intense. The footprints fewer. It was as if my compliance, my fear, my stillness, my observation had satisfied it, at least temporarily. I convinced myself that it had gone, that I could begin living again. But I was wrong. One morning I opened my blinds and froze. Across the street, framed in the shadows of the neighbor's garage, it stood. Tall, broad, upright, motionless, watching. Its head tilted slightly, the way it had in the clearing, one arm lifted briefly, pointing toward me. Then it vanished behind the garage. I realized then that it had never left. It had been waiting for me to forget, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to step outside without noticing it first. I understood something that day, something deep and primal. This wasn't just a forest creature, not just a predator. It was something else, something that could bridge space, that could study and learn and communicate in ways humans could barely comprehend, something that chose when and how to reveal itself. And I knew, with a certainty that settled over my nerves like ice, that it had chosen me. It had been watching me from the beginning, and it would continue to do so. Every shadow, every sound, every step I took, every breath. I could run, I could barricade myself. I could try to ignore it, but it would always be there. Because now, I belonged to its observation, its test, its world. And the rules had changed. I was no longer alone. The week after it had shown me the footprint beside my car, the tension inside the house became a living thing. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, curling around my spine, whispering at the back of my skull in a language I didn't want to understand. Every sound became a question. Every shadow became a threat. I stopped moving freely. I walked along walls as if they could protect me, hugging the edges of furniture like makeshift fortifications. My phone stayed in my hand at all times, though the cameras rarely showed anything beyond static and empty lawns. Yet I knew it was there. I could feel the weight of it, patient and omnipresent. The metallic smell returned during the nights, stronger than ever. Sometimes it came in waves so sharp that I gagged and stumbled backward, catching the wall to steady myself. I began to see things in the corners of my vision, subtle movements, like branches brushing together when no wind existed, glimpses of dark forms half hidden between trees, between cars, between streetlights. It wasn't hallucination. I knew what it was. Awareness had a presence, a shape, and I could sense it pressing just beyond my perception. Sleep became impossible. I would lie on the couch or in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breath and the faint creaks of the house. Sometimes the knocks returned, not always 3, not always slow, sometimes 5, sometimes a single heavy one, as if it were testing patience, testing fear. Each time I froze, the world shrinking around the sound, my chest tightening until I could hardly draw air. I stopped trying to rationalize it. I stopped trying to reason with myself. It didn't respond to logic. It didn't need to. It was patient. It was observing. I could feel its gaze through the walls, the floors, the windows. My own home had become a cage. Not just a physical cage, but a mental one. I could not escape it because it existed in the gaps of my perception, in the spaces where I least expected it. One night, around 2:45 a.m., I heard a sound that nearly made me collapse. It was not a knock, not a shift of weight. It was a low, guttural rumble, almost like the vibration of a large chest, exhaling in the dark. It resonated through the floorboards and walls, settling into my bones. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I could feel the air itself pressing against me. The metallic scent rolled through the room in a thick wave. I gagged, stumbled backward, and fell to the floor, hands clamped over my mouth. Then, as suddenly as it began, the rumble stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before, as if the absence of sound carried more threat than any noise could. I realized then, as I sat on the floor trembling, that the patterns were changing. This was no longer simply about observation. It was about control. It had learned my routines, my habits, my reactions. It had catalogued my fear, tested my responses, and adjusted its actions accordingly. My house, my property, my personal space. All of it was no longer mine. It had crossed every boundary, learned every line, and had begun drawing new ones. And I was caught between them. Days blurred. I stopped leaving the house unless necessary. I stopped speaking with neighbors. I became a ghost in my own life. Moving only with purpose and extreme caution. Every sound outside made my chest tighten. The distant bark of a dog, the rumble of a passing car, the flutter of leaves in a light breeze. I began to notice things I had never seen before. Subtle depressions in soil that hadn't been there the night before. Faint scratches on tree bark, broken twigs at the edges of the yard. At first, I told myself these were coincidences, nature's randomness. But the pattern became undeniable. Each mark, each anomaly, aligned with the times I had been outside or moved in my home. It was a silent trail, a breadcrumb path designed to remind me that I was never alone, that I was constantly watched, constantly measured. The turning point came on a rainy night. The wind carried the metallic scent through the house with unusual clarity. I had barricaded the doors, set the cameras, and was crouched on the floor, my back pressed against the bedroom wall. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic pulse of the rain against the roof. And then I heard it, a subtle tapping, irregular but deliberate, against the side of the house where the living room wall met the back porch. Slow at first, then faster, growing in urgency, a pattern that felt too deliberate to be natural. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. I whispered into the dark, "I can't. Please, not here." No answer. Only the tapping, persistent, growing. I realized then that I couldn't hide. I couldn't run. Every exit had been measured, every entrance accounted for. It knew I would be inside. It had been inside, in its way, before. The prints, the knocks, the shifting doors, the rustling above the ceiling. All of it told a story. I was prey. Yes, but more than that, I was being tested. My fear was catalogued, my compliance measured, and the tests were escalating. In a desperate attempt to reclaim some sense of agency, I left the bedroom. I moved toward the living room in slow, careful steps, counting each one, listening for movement. The metallic scent intensified. My flashlight in my trembling hand cut through the darkness, scanning the room, the doors, the windows, the faint outlines of furniture. At the back porch door, I froze. The glass was fogged from condensation, and I thought I saw a shape. Tall, upright, impossible, pressing close against it. My heart froze. I didn't dare move. My breath caught. Then it shifted slightly, retreating just enough to remain out of view. I realized something horrifying. It wasn't confined to certain areas. It could appear, disappear, shift as it willed. It had learned to remain unseen until it chose to reveal itself. My house was no longer a home. It was a stage, and I was its constant subject. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the door. My mind raced through everything I had read, every forum, every blurry photograph, every whispered account. Dogman, upright canine, intelligent, observant, patient. None of the accounts captured what I was experiencing. None spoke of the control, the psychological domination, the intimate study of a single individual over days and weeks. None prepared me for the certainty that this thing was not just aware of me, it understood me. I spent the next days in a cycle I could not escape. Eat, barricade, watch, wait, sleep fitfully, repeat. Occasionally I glimpsed it outside the window, a shadow between the trees, a dark shape in the backyard, always upright, always still, always observing. The metallic scent followed it like a signature, and each time my body reacted with the same physical tension, the same nausea, the same crushing awareness of my vulnerability. One night, I made the mistake of moving to the front yard. I needed air. I needed space. I told myself it was impossible for it to be outside. I was careful. I stayed in the light of the porch lamp, scanning the line of the street, the adjacent yards. I froze when I noticed movement at the edge of the camera's vision. Between two parked cars, a shape shifted. Tall, broad, upright, its head tilted slightly, watching. And then it stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each step pressing into the gravel with unnatural precision. I could see the arch of the feet, the elongated toes, the presence. It stopped when it reached the lawn line, fully visible now under the lamp. The metallic scent rolled toward me in waves. My body trembled, but I did not move. My throat tightened. I understood the rule. Do not run. Do not flee. Movement invited attention. It studied me for minutes that felt like hours. Then almost casually, it stepped backward, disappearing into shadow. Its absence carried weight. The prints it left behind were shallow impressions, but perfectly spaced, a silent trail marking the edge of territory it now claimed without question. I realized then the psychological truth. It had crossed all boundaries. My fear, my compliance, my observation, everything had been recorded, studied, and used to shape its understanding of me. I went back inside, shaking, gasping for air, and locked the doors behind me. For the first time, I understood that there would be no negotiation, no truce. This was an apex predator, not bound by human expectations, not bound by any sense of fairness or reason. It was patient. It was intelligent. It was deliberate. And I was caught in its orbit. That night, the knocks came again. Not 3, not 5, but a staccato series of irregular taps across the walls and floor. I counted them, unable to control myself. They matched no rhythm I knew. They were communication, testing, teaching. Each tap pressed against my mind as much as the house. And then silence. Complete. Oppressive. Absolute. I realized I could no longer pretend. I could no longer rationalize. I could not sleep. I could not leave. I could not ignore the weight of its awareness pressing against me from every shadow, and worse. I was beginning to feel a strange, sick curiosity, a need to see it, understand it, know its limits, if it had any. Because I knew, deep down, that the moment I allowed myself to move freely, to ignore it, to step outside without caution, the rules would change, and the predator would act. I had reached a point where waiting was no longer an option. The fear had grown too heavy, too constant, pressing into my chest with a weight that made every breath a conscious effort. I could not sit and be observed any longer. The house was a cage, the yard a hunting ground. Even the roads beyond my property felt mapped and measured by something unseen. I had to act. I had to reclaim some sliver of control, even if it meant risking everything. The plan was simple, though simple in my mind often meant disastrous in reality. I would leave. I would drive away, not to flee, not to escape entirely. There was no escape, but to move beyond the immediate perimeter it had been testing. I packed lightly. My phone, charger, water, a flashlight, a small pocket knife. The rest of my belongings could wait. I kept checking the doors, making sure each was locked behind me until the last possible moment. Every step toward the car was deliberate. I listened constantly. Each rustle of leaves, each groan of the house, each distant car horn felt like a signal. I was not alone, that the predator knew, that it was waiting. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors behind me. The engine started without protest. Headlights cut through the darkness. I waited a long moment, heart hammering, listening for signs that it had followed me outside. Nothing. Just the sound of the engine and my own ragged breathing. Then, with hands trembling on the wheel, I eased out of the driveway. The streets were empty. Streetlights flickered in intermittent gaps. The metallic scent, so present inside the house, lingered faintly in the air, a reminder that I was still marked, still tracked. I drove slowly, scanning the tree lines, every shadow, every darkened corner. The sense of being watched was omnipresent, pressing against my consciousness from every angle. And then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the yard I had just passed, tall, broad, upright, motionless, its head tilted slightly, the same way it had in the clearing, the same way it had observed me from my driveway. Its presence radiated an awareness that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I swerved slightly, heart hammering. It did not move. It simply watched, as if it knew I had seen it. Panic surged, followed immediately by a strange, sick thrill. I had seen it outside my controlled environment. I had confronted it in motion, and I had survived. For a moment I felt a semblance of power, a false sense of mastery. But the feeling did not last. The next movement came in a blur. A branch snapped sharply to the right. The shape moved faster than it should have been able to, crossing the distance between tree and street in a single fluid motion. It was at the edge of my headlights before I fully registered it. I froze, gripping the wheel. Its eyes reflected pale gold in the beams. Its chest rose and fell with a slow, deliberate rhythm. each movement emphasizing its size, its power. I pressed the accelerator. Tires squealed against wet asphalt. My body shook violently. It matched my pace. I tried to increase speed, heart hammering, lungs burning, adrenaline flooding every vein. But somehow, it did not fall behind. It ran, not like a human, not like a dog, not like any animal I had ever seen. Its stride was long, controlled, intelligent. It did not stumble. It did not hesitate. I turned sharply, hoping to lose it in the side streets, but every alley, every corner, every possible escape route seemed anticipated. It was there, always, watching, measuring. I realized in that instant that my notion of escape was irrelevant. I was not fleeing. I was moving along a path it had already predicted. My freedom was an illusion. Panic became desperation. I thought of calling for help, but the thought of anyone else seeing it, of anyone else experiencing the reality I had endured, was unbearable. It would not stop for them. It had learned to be invisible until it chose otherwise. No one could prepare for this. I drove faster, my mind racing for options. Nothing seemed viable. Every street, every yard, every shadow could be a trap. And then I heard the first sound I had been dreading, the low, resonant growl, closer than it had ever been, vibrating through the vehicle itself. The vibration rattled the frame, traveled through the tires, through the asphalt, into my bones. I pressed the accelerator harder, twisting the wheel violently, tires screeching. The growl grew, louder, and I caught a movement in the rearview mirror. It was not just behind me. It was everywhere at once, appearing in patches of shadow along the sides of the road, in reflections, in glimpses I could not fully comprehend. I lost control. My car skidded into a side street, colliding lightly with a curb, throwing me against the seatbelt. The engine revved, tires spinning, and I slammed my foot down, desperate to maintain momentum. And then just for a moment, the sensation of eyes pressing from every side was gone. Silence, complete and suffocating, filled the space. My chest heaved. I could not think. I could not breathe. Then a shadow fell across the windshield, large, impossible. Its head pressed against the glass for a split second. Metallic scent filled the cab. I screamed, swerving violently, tires sliding on wet pavement. The shape leapt back in an impossible motion, disappearing into darkness. I knew it had marked me, knew that this was not the end, knew that nothing would ever be the same. By dawn, I was parked at the edge of a forest, back roads I did not recognize, hands shaking violently on the wheel. I couldn't bring myself to move. I had survived, but I had crossed a threshold. The Dogman had revealed more of itself than ever before. It had chased me, studied me, forced me into action. And I realized, with a deep hollow sinking, that I had lost control. It was no longer testing boundaries. It was creating them. I spent the next hours shaking, hyper-aware, as the forest around me became a stage for every irrational fear I had cultivated over weeks. The metallic scent lingered faintly in the wind. Rustling in the underbrush sounded like footsteps. Shadows moved in ways no natural wind could produce. My mind, already frayed, began to question reality itself. Was it moving with me? Ahead of me? Behind me? Or was this just my fear, projecting life onto the dark? I decided to leave the car, to move on foot. Every instinct screamed against it, but I could not sit frozen forever. I stepped onto the wet soil, boots sinking slightly. The scent hit stronger now. The forest, once familiar in daylight, seemed alien. Every branch, every leaf, every twisted root became a potential threat. And then I saw it, not in the shadows, not partially hidden, clear. Standing upright in a small clearing ahead, eyes reflecting faint morning light. It did not move, it did not snarl, it simply observed. Its chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately. The hair along its back bristled subtly. Every ounce of its presence radiated intelligence. It tilted its head, and I felt the same recognition I had in the clearing weeks before, only now intensified. This was no longer observation. This was confrontation. I froze. Footsteps crunched softly behind me. Not from the Dogman, from the forest floor. Something moved. I spun, flashlight sweeping. Nothing. I turned back. It had taken a step closer. Another metallic breath rolled across the clearing. I realized I had to make a choice. Run and risk triggering its chase in the open forests, or attempt a confrontation in the small clearing. Neither option felt safe. Neither felt rational. I stood my ground, heart hammering, palms slick on the flashlight. My mind raced. If it attacked, if it lunged, I had only a knife, light, and fear as tools. But it had shown restraint before. It had taught me patterns. It had tested me. And somehow I knew that hesitation now could be more dangerous than any immediate action. I spoke aloud. I know you're there. I see you. My voice shook violently. The forest swallowed the words. No response. The eyes glinted briefly, then another step forward. I raised the flashlight, its beam slicing through the mist. The shadowed face became visible, pale, elongated, canine features, grotesque yet intelligent, upright posture impossibly tall. My stomach churned. Adrenaline surged. I took another step forward, knife clutched uselessly in my right hand. It tilted its head again. The metallic smell swelled into something almost tangible, pressing against my lungs, and then, suddenly, it lunged. Not at me directly, but toward a cluster of trees nearby, a rapid blur that disappeared behind trunks. My knees buckled, flashlight dropping, knife clattering. I scrambled backward, heart hammering, barely catching the beam as it re-emerged closer, now circling, cutting off escape. Panic overwhelmed strategy. I ran blindly. Twigs snapped beneath my feet, branches slashing at my face and arms. Its presence was constant, oppressive, like gravity pulling at me from multiple directions, and then a sharp impact. My shoulder collided with a tree. Pain exploded across my body. I fell, vision swimming, lungs burning. It was above me in a heartbeat, not attacking. Yet but the pressure of presence alone pinned me to the damp earth. I felt the intelligence in its gaze, the control. My body shook violently. I realized in absolute horror that I was completely at its mercy. The following moments blurred. I tried to scramble, tried to rise. The metallic smell filled my nostrils. My knife offered no protection. Every instinct screamed to run, but every step seemed anticipated, blocked, mirrored. The forest had become a trap. And then it stopped, just a few feet away, standing upright, watching. No attack, just observation. I gasped, chest heaving, trembling. I realized something devastating. It had won, not by killing me, not by maiming me, but by proving the futility of resistance. My world, my freedom, my very body had been tested and found compliant. I staggered upright slowly, hands shaking violently. My limbs ached, my lungs burned. Every ounce of my being screamed for movement, but I froze, realizing the forest itself seemed to lean inward, closing around me. Its presence had transformed the space. I was no longer moving in a neutral environment. I was moving inside its perception, and it was complete. The realization hit like a hammer. I had lost everything that mattered. Control, freedom, safety, even understanding. Every line I had tried to draw had been erased, every rule I had followed twisted to serve its observation. And in that moment, I understood the true horror. It was not hunting me for food. It was hunting me for compliance, for study, for the slow extraction of my instinctive reactions. I was broken, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and yet it lingered, upright and still, as if granting me a final cruel mercy. I could live, for now, but I knew, with an irrevocable certainty, that the next time it moved, the rules would change again. I woke to silence the morning after the forest encounter, and it was a silence so heavy I could feel it pressing into my chest. My body ached in ways I hadn't known were possible. Every joint stiff, every muscle screaming, bruises already forming along my arms and legs from the collision with trees, the frantic scrambling, the sheer force of panic. The sky was pale gray, filtered through clouds that promised rain, and even from inside the car I could feel the world had shifted. Nothing looked the same. Even the ordinary sounds of distant traffic, birds or wind in the leaves, felt alien, like they were echoing through a place I no longer inhabited. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat, pressed against the seat, feeling the tremor of adrenaline fade into a hollow numbness. The forest had claimed more than my energy. It had claimed a piece of my mind, my certainty, my confidence in reality itself. I was alive, yes, but the relief of survival was almost unbearable in its emptiness. There was no triumph, no pride, only the residue of terror. Eventually, I forced myself to leave the car. Each step toward the house was deliberate, cautious, as though the forest, the Dogman, the world itself were watching, waiting for me to slip again. The metallic scent lingered faintly in the air, almost like a signature, a reminder that whatever had hunted me had left its mark, not just on the soil or the trees, but on me. I entered the house quietly, locking doors behind me, checking windows, scanning the corners of every room. Everything was still, too perfect. Days passed, weeks even. I counted them in the meticulous way of someone marking the edges of a prison. Every night I would sit in the darkness, listening to the house, to the faint rustle of leaves outside, to the subtle creaks of the structure settling. Every sound became loaded with meaning. I learned to interpret the smallest vibrations in the floor. Every draft of air against my skin was a signal. My eyes constantly swept every shadow. The sense of being observed never left. I could not sleep deeply. Naps were fitful, and yet despite the exhaustion, I could not bring myself to leave the house for more than brief moments. Never alone, never at dusk, never without light. The guilt was heavier than the fear. I realized I had been selfish in my attempts to flee, in my desperate choices. The Dogman had taught me in ways I hadn't consented to, forced me to recognize the fragility of my body, the limitations of my mind. And in those lessons, I had learned something darker. I could not protect anyone else. Anyone who came near my home, anyone who entered the forest, would be at risk. The idea of warning neighbors or friends seemed absurd. There were no words to explain what I had seen, no proof they could accept without thinking me insane. And so, I became isolated by necessity. My existence narrowed to a series of survival routines and careful observation. I began to keep notes, not formal journals, those would have been futile, but scribbles on scraps of paper, fragments of thought, details of patterns I noticed, the subtle movements of shadows, the timing of sounds. Each note was a confession, a small attempt to assert control, to make sense of a reality that had defied all rationality. Yet even these notes made me uneasy. I felt them being watched, evaluated, their meaning absorbed by an invisible presence. It was as though my act of writing, of observing, fed into a feedback loop I could not break. The Dogman was not just out there. It was here, in some inexplicable way, entwined with my perception, my understanding, my consciousness. Occasionally, I thought I saw it. A shadow at the edge of a window, a figure between tree trunks in the neighbor's yard. Or perhaps it was memory, projection, my mind filling gaps where fear demanded it. I could not trust my own senses anymore, yet I could not ignore them either. The tension was unbearable and constant. I began sleeping with lights on, cameras recording in every direction, every notification set to maximum sensitivity. Even then I felt the invisible weight pressing through walls and ceilings, the faint metallic scent, whispering that it could be anywhere. The moral conflict became acute when I realized the extent of its intelligence. It did not act on instinct alone. It observed, learned, adapted. Every small action I took, every fearful tremor of my body, every step I made outside, every glance over my shoulder, it catalogued and analyzed. I could not hide. I could not outthink it. And yet I could not stop trying. I forced myself into routines designed to test it, to gauge its patience, to measure its reactions. Each experiment left me trembling, both physically and mentally. I realized that my very existence had become a dialogue with something far beyond human comprehension, a dialogue conducted through fear, silence, and the minutiae of daily life. Weeks bled into months. I stopped speaking to almost everyone. Friends drifted away, concerned at my absence, my avoidance. Phone calls went unanswered, invitations ignored. My life had contracted into the house, the yard, the forest beyond, and the narrow, endless corridors of thought that occupied every moment. The world outside existed only as a threat, a reminder that freedom was an illusion, and the Dogman, wherever it was, never forgot. Its observation never ceased. It was a presence that could not be banished by doors, locks, or walls. I began to reflect on what had happened, the encounters, the forest, the night it lunged, the chase, the fear, yes, but also the fascination. There was a perverse clarity in those moments, a recognition of limits, of primal boundaries. I began to understand it not as a mere predator, but as a measure of existence, of vulnerability. And yet, that understanding brought no peace, only a more profound sense of guilt, for surviving, for failing, for existing in a way that exposed me to its attention and yet left others unprepared. Sometimes, in the quietest hours before dawn, I would sit at the edge of the forest and listen. The metallic scent would rise faintly on the breeze, carrying with it the memory of weight, of presence, of eyes that had learned my movements long before I knew them. I would wait, trembling, wondering whether it was near or simply a ghost of my own imagination, and then invariably a movement, a rustle, a flash of something too tall and too upright between the trees would remind me. I was not alone. I was never alone. Even now, I cannot tell whether the fear has diminished or simply become a constant hum beneath consciousness. Numbness has replaced panic, vigilance has replaced sleep, and guilt has replaced hope. I'm aware of every shadow, every shift in light, every metallic hint in the air. My body reacts before my mind can process, my muscles tense at the smallest sound, my stomach knots before my eyes fully register what is there. And yet, I remain alive, though living feels like a series of movements calculated to avoid notice, to avoid provocation, to avoid the full, immediate weight of its awareness. I write these words because I must. Because acknowledgement is the only form of control left to me. Because the act of documenting, even privately, reminds me that I existed, that I survived, that I felt every moment of terror and awe in its presence. The Dogman has taken much from me. Peace, sleep, freedom, certainty. But it cannot take the record, cannot erase memory, cannot remove the imprint of the fear that reshaped every part of my life. These words are the remnants of a self that once moved freely, that once breathed without constant calculation, and yet even as I write, I feel it. Watching, patient, waiting, always just beyond the edge of perception. The metallic scent lingers faintly in the air, a signal that it is near, a reminder that no matter how carefully I move, how diligently I observe, how cautiously I exist, it remains. I do not know what it wants. I do not know why it chooses to linger, to watch, to teach through fear. I only know that its presence has become the lens through which all of life is filtered, the framework for every decision, every hesitation, every thought. I have tried to reconcile with it, to imagine it as a force of nature rather than a sentient observer. I have tried to convince myself that I can adapt, endure, and coexist, but the truth is unavoidable. I am changed. I am fractured. I am haunted. The forest, the prints, the knocks, the metallic scent, they are embedded in my body and mind. They will not fade. Sometimes I imagine returning to the clearing where it first appeared, to confront it fully, to challenge it, to understand it. But the thought terrifies me beyond reason. Even imagining that encounter sends a tremor through my body. I realize that I am bound not by chains, not by walls, not by circumstance, but by awareness itself. I cannot unsee it. I cannot unfeel the weight of its gaze, the precision of its movements, the deliberate calculation in every step. I exist now in a constant balance between fear and fascination, between survival and observation, between remembering and forgetting. And in this balance I am aware that life will never be ordinary again. I am aware that sleep will never be free, that movement will always be measured, that the metallic scent and the subtle, almost imperceptible rustle of leaves will always carry meaning. I am aware that I have been irrevocably changed, and so I confess this. I survived. I live. But I am no longer the same. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every scent in the air is a reminder that it is there, that it is patient, that it is intelligent, that it watches, that it waits, and that my life, my freedom, my very being has become entwined with something I cannot fully comprehend, cannot fully escape, cannot fully resist. I am alive, but I am haunted, always.